Welcome to this Rulefinder tutorial. In this video, we're going to show you how to conduct an investigation on a particular topic. Our topic of investigation is going to be in the refrigeration sector. I'm going to assume that your knowledge of the standard is minimal, and so we're going to work in right from the very beginning. So here's our interface. Yours may not look exactly like this, but I have access to all areas of Rulefinder. So first of all, I'm going to say I want to look in the pressure documents. And I'm going to choose to sort my findings by relevance. We can then type into the search box the phrase refrigeration systems. And so Rulefinder is going to show us a list of all the documents in the library that have the words refrigeration systems in it. I haven't specified as yet that I would like the words refrigeration systems to be only in the title. And so as I scroll down, you'll see that there are beyond 6 pages of findings with the phrase refrigeration systems. Clearly, I need to refine my search. So first of all, I could say that I'm only interested in seeing standards rather than guidance documents. And so we can click on the document type of EN standard, for example. I could go further and say I'm only interested in those standards which has the words refrigeration systems in the title. And I can click title only and search again. And so we can narrow down our search results. So I can now scroll down the list of results presented by Rulefinder, and you can see that there's an array of different standards. But we notice here we have the BSEN 378 series of standards entitled refrigeration systems and heat pumps, and the various parts refer to different aspects. Let us imagine we're particularly interested in looking at the requirements for permanent joints in piping. We could put a search for the term permanent joints, but there's a danger we could end up with permanent joints for all sorts of different types of equipment. So looking at the titles, we can see that part 2 of BSEN 378 is entitled Design, Construction, Testing, Marking and Documentation. This is likely, I imagine, to include the requirements for permanent joints. So let's click Go to Document and see what we get. Well, we could click the button for PDF and see a PDF copy of the standard, but we can do better than that. As we look down the list of the titles on the left-hand side, we have the usual scope, normative references, terms and definitions, as we will see in all EN standards. We then start getting into requirements, and we can immediately see that part 6 is requirements for assemblies. Well, if we're joining different bits of piping, then we'll have got some kind of assembly. So it's safe to imagine that this is where we'll find requirements for permanent joints. If I click on the little arrow, I can expand that section, and I can see immediately that section 2 is about design and construction. That sounds promising if we're looking for permanent joints. So we can expand it, which shows that it's quite a long section, 6.2. And as we scroll down the list, we can see 6.2.3 is piping. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for. So let's expand that again. We can scroll down and we can see 6232, piping, joints and fittings. So let's click on that rather than expand it. And sure enough, section 6.2.3.2.2 is entitled permanent joints. It says welding or brazed joints shall comply with the requirements of EN 14276 part 2. Now, if we were doing this old school, at this point we would probably let out an expletive and have to go and order yet another standard. But in Rulefinder, we have a direct link to go and view that standard. In fact, we can click on the link and we get a synopsis of that standard to make sure that we are genuinely interested in that document before we get there. So I'm going to click Go to Document, and now immediately we are delivered to BSEN 14276 Part 2, which has the requirements for permanent joining. On arrival at 14276 Part 2, we might have been expecting to find everything we need to know about permanent joints, but as you can see on the left, we're back in yet another EN standard with a scope, normative references, terms and definitions, and so on. Well, we can see that section 7 is entitled Manufacturing, Well, certainly permanent joints are part of the manufacturing process, so let's expand section 7. And we can see that part 7.3 is called permanent joints. And this is where it becomes very frustrating if you're not in Rulefinder, because instead of getting the requirements, all you get is another reference to go and see another standard, 14276 part 1. Imagine if you were doing this old school. You would curse and have to go and order another standard. But we can click the link and be taken straight to section 14276 part 1. But before we do that, just note what's written underneath. While there's just one line in the standard about permanent joints, the engineers at Rulefinder, who are themselves involved in the conformity assessment of pressure equipment every day, have listed all the guidelines that they believe are relevant to the topic of permanent joints. Now, these are helpful guidelines that go beyond the raw words of the standards and are written to help you interpret these issues. So it could be that actually you're more interested in the guideline than you are the text of the standard. But I'm not going to take up your time reading through the guidelines right now. Let's just click the link and go off to section 7.4 of ISO 14276 part 1. On arrival, we have the same list of Rulefinder insights with links to the guidelines, because of course we're still talking about permanent joints. But as we scroll down, you can see in white the requirements of the standard. Section 7.4.1 are general, section 7.4.4 is welding. But let's imagine we're interested in brazing. Well, we could just keep scrolling until we find ourselves at section 7.4.5, but we could have got there more quickly. We could have expanded on the left, section 7 for manufacturing, and we'd have found that 7.4 is permanent joints. Expanding that, we could then find 7.4.5 brazing in the list. We could have gone another way. In most browsers, if you hit Control F, you'll bring up an on-page search box, and you can type in the word brazing, and in this case it will show us that there are 26 occurrences of the word brazing, and we can step through them until we find the section 7.45 for brazing. Now let us imagine that we're most interested in brazier approval, as in the operator. If we scroll on down to section 7.4.5.5, we find we have a section on brazier approval, and look what's happened. We have a reference to yet another standard. Thank goodness we're in Rulefinder and don't have to buy another one. So we can click at the link and find we're taken to 13585. Let's go to the document. And this standard is entitled Qualification Test of Braziers and Brazing Operators. This sounds exactly where we want to be. And as we scroll down the left, we can see the section titles, and we can expand and jump to any section you're particularly interested in. Now, as you can see, we've jumped through quite a number of standards and had to follow quite a number of links to get here. Rulefinder has made it an easy process, but it's not been a short one, even inside Rulefinder. So let me show how we might have done this by another route. Let's click back on the top menu to go back to the original library. And let's reset our search. Let's type in the search box brazier approval and click search. And there you can see in the first two documents, the first one refers to brazing procedure approval, and the second one to qualification and test of braziers and brazing operators. So we might have found our way to what we were looking for a very much quicker way. But whichever way you go, Rulefinder will provide you the answer. Thanks for your time.